Russian disinformation is relentless. Like floodwaters, it envelops all low-lying and unprotected things, and when it recedes, it leaves them coated with a filthy, foul-smelling taint. We're all of us vulnerable. Russian disinformation continues to be a threat to Ukrainian sovereignty and unity, though is perhaps not as effective as it was in the years 2014 to 2022. Nevertheless, new narratives are created and propagated continuously to try to divide, confuse, and delay the allies who are supporting Ukraine and to erode support for Ukraine's cause around the world. Aggressive information warfare still threatens information security and social stability as well, especially in states which Russia seeks to destabilise, confuse, or coerce, and their politicians into supporting the Russian line. Russia is still a malign influence in the world. Welcome to Silicon Curtain Podcast. Please like and subscribe if you like the content we produce. It will really help people find our fantastic speakers and within YouTube's algorithm and the way it works. Yuliia Dukach is a full-stack data journalist at texty.org.ua and has extensive experience in creating a range of data-driven stories and investigating disinformation in the Ukrainian news media. Texty is a Ukrainian data journalism agency that promotes transparency and accountability by developing high-quality journalism and data journalism. Their activities include analysis and presentation of big data in an interesting and comprehensive way in the form of interactive infographics and web applications. They investigate and research socially important topics that other media do not often raise for a number of reasons. Yuliia has a PhD in sociology and uses her sociological background and insights to bring to life texts, statistics, and network data to fight Russian disinformation operations in the Ukrainian media. Yuliia, welcome to the channel.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Well, our
Happy
audience...
to be here.
Oh, that's fantastic. And of course, you are calling from Kiev, so we must be thankful that there is no attack on, and we must be thankful that the electricity is on. And I think it helps our audience to understand the kind of pressures you work under. Before we hit record, I mean, it's been quite a difficult weekend, hasn't it? And with May Day coming up, Russia always seems to launch attacks that coincide with either anniversaries or holidays. So before we go into the sort of topics, what kind of a weekend have you had?
Oh, it was quite a specific weekend. I had the possibility to sleep in shelter from in the night from Sunday to Monday. But I really, it's like a normal life for almost all Ukrainians who are still in Ukraine. So it's nothing specific during this war, unfortunately.
And you've got used to being functional, haven't you, in those circumstances? So I imagine you'd have sort of travel bags, computers, power supplies. You've got everything ready to go down to shelter.
Yeah, and now for today I have a quite comfortable shelter actually, where I spend a lot of time. And I'm the person who live on the 20th floor, and that's why during this winter, when we had no electricity and we had no elevator, so I have a very strong legs, and it's like I can speak a lot about all these specifics of life in Kiev or other Ukrainian cities, but I really don't want to do it a lot.
No, well, that helps people to understand, you know, how amazing actually is the work that gets done, not just by you and your colleagues, but many organizations, news organizations, and of course organizations fighting Russian disinformation. Well, let's get into that topic, because today we are going to talk about Texty and the work there. We've got lots of example stories, but before we jump into it, let's talk about sort of texty.org.ua. Its origins, when it was set up, why it was set up, and what its main focus is.
Texty is a really think tank media in Ukraine, and I think for today it is the only one media who actually doing a lot in data journalism. So we don't have a great news feed, but we got a lot of long reads and a special data journalism projects. So it's like our main activity and our main product. And Texty were born in 2010. As I remember, I am actually with Texty team for almost 5 years. And for today, I'm the head of our little team who investigates Russian disinformation, actually. And we do it for almost 5 years. We do a lot in investigating Russian disinformation with methods of machine learning algorithms, and together with big data and other tools. So we are not doing fact checking, but we actually trying to find some narratives, some meta topics of main Russian propaganda, of Russian propaganda.
And of course, you do that in the Ukrainian media. So you try to spot Russian disinformation narratives that, either more obviously or often it's actually more subtle, of course, because many Ukrainians are actually tuned in to the broad narratives of Russian proper disinformation. But of course, I think, and we get this in the West a lot as well, there are subtleties that come along with that. There's the way you have editorial choice, the way you have framing of different questions can often reveal biases that have been subconsciously influenced by propaganda. Do you do this only in the context of Ukrainian media, or do you also have to go and look at Russian domestic disinformation as well, or Russian propaganda, to try and find the origins of some of these ways of thinking?
Before the start of full-scale invasion, before the February 2022, actually, our main focus were Ukrainian media who spread Russian propaganda. So first of all, we looked on Ukrainian sites. I'd like even to say not so-called media who were happy to, for a little price, share anything of anyone who will pay for it. So with Russian money, they spread a lot of Russian news and Russian narratives, actually. So first of all, we focused on them just because we wanted to highlight that in Ukraine, we have a lot of Russian agents. Even Ukrainian media can easily become a Russian agent spreading Russian narratives. But we actually did created a model, like machine learning algorithms, that helped to find manipulative and very emotional news in Ukrainian newsfeed. But after the full-scale invasion, it became really difficult to compare Ukrainian newsfeed and Russian newsfeed and find some similarities, just because Ukrainian newsfeed becomes absolutely pro-Ukrainian. Some sites, some media were closed just because they stopped to achieve Russian money. But other media became absolutely pro-Ukrainian, and it's become really difficult to find something pro-Russian there. That's why from the February 2022, we started to analyze Russian newsfeed. Only Russians mainstream media and Russian so-called pro-Ukrainian manipulative media like Ukraina.ru or another very manipulative, very propagandistic sites, Russian sites. And we are, for today, we are actually trying to look how many attention different Russian media gives to Ukrainian topic, to the topic of war, to the topic so-called special military operations, or to the topic of some Western aggression to Russia, for example. So we are looking only into the Russian newsfeed and trying to understand how Russian propaganda works for Russian audience. And we are trying to understand how it can be helpful for Ukraine to create our narratives, our counter narratives to Russian propaganda, and how it can be, how can we do it in the most effective way.
And of course, Russian propaganda has changed, has pivoted the entire intention behind it in the last couple of months, hasn't it? With the introduction of conscription, these big ways of conscription. Traditionally, Russian propaganda was all about persuading people not to have to think, not to have to take action, broadly speaking. It was there to stoke indifference, confusion, cynicism, to undermine the very idea that there is any objective truth or opposition. I think, if you could label a single label, it was don't bother. Now they have a different narrative, which is take action. And it's very difficult, isn't it? They're trying to persuade Russians that it is a noble thing and it is their duty, not just their national duty, but there's a big emphasis on it being a male duty, that somehow their virility is dependent on them going out to fight. They now want to try and persuade people to support the state and take action. And that's very difficult after decades of propaganda trying to invoke the complete opposite.
Yeah, it's really difficult, but I'm not sure if this main narrative was absolutely changed. I think that one of the main idea of Russian propaganda is to spread as many different narratives as they can do. For example, they can, at one time, they can speak about the so-called like Ruski Mir or brotherhoods, like Ukrainians are our brothers, and in 2 minutes they can talk about all of the Ukrainians are Nazis. So like there are a lot of internal conflicts in thesis of Russian propaganda, but I think that it's one of the methods actually to create this atmosphere of like a feeling that there is nothing concrete, there is no truth, there are a lot of meanings and a lot of thoughts, and you can't be sure that what you're doing today is will not be absolutely unnormal tomorrow.
And of course, there are other intents there as well. It's not just to persuade the world that their illegal invasion is somehow justified. They also want the blame in some people's minds to shift towards NATO and the West rather than against the aggressor, and create a more complex narrative, often that has elements of geopolitics, left-right politics, and they will weaponize these. But there's a whole other layer as well, isn't there? Which is to try and slow down and delay the provision of armaments to Ukraine. And they use many, many different techniques, don't they? And they vary those by country because they understand that there are different nuances. I mean, the UK, these aren't going to really work too well in the UK. So in the UK, they try the sort of energy, weaponize energy, or why are you paying higher bills? Why are you taking that financial hit? Is it really in your interests? But in different countries, they'll try and sow these divisions in different ways, won't they?
Actually, it is, I think for today, it's one of the main focus of Russian propaganda is actually Ukrainian partners and other European countries. And just last week, we found each week we create like a weekly monitoring of Russian propaganda. We analyze most popular topics of Russian propaganda in Russian newsfeed together with machine learning algorithms, and then together with some expertise in Ukraine. We are creating like a list of the most popular and hottest topics of Russian propaganda. And just last week, the main topic was about the Europe in protests, like unstable Europe, that democracy in Europe is absolutely unstable, and 1,000 of people go to the squares and try to protest against something. And even if there is some like a protest about the economical issues, Russia will show to Russian citizens that here, look, they protest against NATO or they protest against help to Ukraine and Ukrainians. And like it's one of the main topics of Russian propaganda in Europe. It's like to do everything to make each country unstable in political or an economical area, and to show that instability to others, just to underline that look at them, it's much better to live with Putin than to live in democracy.
And that we know that works quite well in Russia itself, whereas Ukrainians would, it seems to me, they react against being told what to do. They react against any perceived reduction of freedoms, and the threats of sort of chaos and protest do not seem to deter Ukrainians, as we've seen the Orange Revolution, Maidan, over and over. That threat of instability is not one that works particularly well in Ukraine. And various Ukrainians I've spoken to have told me sort of jokes which Ukrainians tell themselves. You get 3 Ukrainians in a room and lock them in for a couple of hours, and they'll come out and have formed 4 different political parties. Russians, however, do seem to value stability over freedom in a very sort of broad sense. So this propaganda works quite well. Now, you monitor this, you monitor the different sort of nuances, emotions, strands that underline the news stories in Russia. What do you then do with that information? How do you package it up, sell it on, and use it to make an impact to help Ukraine?
I think it is the most difficult question about this work, is how from the beginning, when we started this project of monitoring Russian propaganda, first of all in Ukrainian news and then in Russian news, the most difficult thing was how to share main results with other audiences. Just because for today, for example, we have a very high level of attention to the topic of Russian disinformation. But a few years ago, it was really difficult to publish a paper about Russian disinformation and to reach quite a big audience, just because it was really difficult topic, and everyone thinks that no one can manipulate him or her. So it's like really difficult. That's why our main audience from the beginning was like experts and politicians. We worked a lot with Ukrainian diplomacies, and we actually created different types of projects and type of content. First of all, we do a lot in our weekly monitoring. So we publish them in most easy form, not like, it's not an analytical report. It's more about like a paper with some quotations, some examples of Russian text, for example. So it's really easy to read. I still hope that it's really easy to read. So we can spread this type of information among and reach as big an audience as it can be. So, but of course, we are data journalists, and that's why we do a lot in data visualization. We have our dashboard on Russian disinformation. Before the full-scale invasion, we had a big dashboard where everyone could compare how different topics were spread in different types of media. So everyone could compare how, for example, topic on Ukrainian nationalists or neo-Nazi, how this topic popular on Russian sides, and if it's popular on Ukrainian side. For example, on Ukrainian mainstream sites who works according to journalist standards, or on the Ukrainian so-called manipulative sites like that Ukraina.ru or anti-fascist or something like this. So everyone could compare. So we create some tools for example, for local journalists, and everyone could, for example, look for 1 or 2 words for some politicians and look how popular this person or this place or this term on different platforms. And actually, from the start of full-scale invasion, we changed a lot our format of work. We created new dashboard of Russian disinfo, only Russian. Yes, it's like a war in Russian media. And we tried to look how changed the level of attention in Russian media to different meta topics and subtopics. For example, how many they write about Ukraine as a failed state, or how many they write about anti-Western rhetoric. And together with dashboard, for example, we found that those term denazification was really popular just in the first months of the full-scale invasion. And after that, the so-called anti-Western rhetoric rised a lot. So we had a decrease of the level of rhetoric on denazification, demilitarization, and increase of topic in topic of the anti-Western rhetoric really increased. So for today, we have like three main types of work. It's our weekly monitoring, our dashboard, and of course, as data journalists, we are really happy to work in data journalism project. For example, we wrote a big text with interactive data with about new network of Telegram channels created by Russian for the cities which they wanted to occupy, for example. So it's like our main methods and our main content we work on.
Is it fair to say that Russian disinformation has a concept of sort of fast narratives and slow narratives? So, you know, a fast narrative might be there are protests in Sweden against NATO, etc., when that might only represent, you know, 0.001% of the population or something. And that's a narrative that will come and it will go, and in the news cycle, it doesn't have much longevity. Whereas another narrative, which we still hear, you know, I met friends over the weekend, and one of them still raised this idea of, what about the Azov battalion? What about the persecution of Russian speakers, blah, blah, blah. Now, I want to raise that one in particular because that is an example of a narrative that's now been doing the rounds for 9 years, since 2014. It doesn't go away. And yet, broadly speaking, it's rubbish, and it's far more nuanced. And you know, as someone who knows Russian, and I believe you come from a sort of predominantly Russian-speaking area of Ukraine, could you sort of describe that particular narrative? Why it's ludicrous, but why it still seems to work, and how can it be countered?
Can you tell more about which narrative? I'm afraid that
the Russian speakers are discriminated against, that you know, Russian literature is banned, that speaking Russian is banned, that, you know, this is the crude form of the propaganda narrative, and it seems to have really stuck in people's heads.
Oh, this narrative is the most difficult just because it's really work in Ukraine, still work. It's still quite like it can create intra-conflict in Ukraine, just because I'm the person who was Russian speaker at home before the full-scale invasion. Then we decided to switch into Ukrainian just because it's really difficult on psychological level to continue to speak Russian. But I know that a lot of my friends and a lot of other Ukrainians, as actually as a sociological results show, they still continue not only even to speak Russian, but even to to feel comfortable to go to some Russian cultural products, for Russian some from the blogs, YouTube channels, music, and so on. So I think the main problem that was that Russia monopolized this Russian language. We know that Russian language is really popular among dozens of countries. It's not only about Ukraine or Belarus, it's also about Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Central Asia, and so on. But Russia still feels possible to monopolize the Russian language as the weapon, as their like force and their main argument that Russian language, it's about the Russian people, and Russian people is about the people of Russia. It's like this logic. And if in Crimea speak Russian, then there live Russians. But it's I think that, for example, the history of Europe, it's about the history of different languages in different countries. We can see a lot of like a lot of examples when in one country can be few official languages, and it's absolutely normal. And I think that those countries are absolutely happy not to have the neighbor who thinks that that language is their monopoly, and that's why they can just invade and take those people back. So this narrative on Russian language still works just because, like it's impossible to switch all the Ukrainian population to Ukrainian language. It's we don't have any objective examples of some problems of Russian speaking in Ukraine, but a lot of Russians believe in that. For example, before the start of full-scale invasion, we had like a short list of these meta topics, meta narratives of Russian propaganda, and the language and problems with Russian languages in Ukraine was on the top of this list, together with Ukraine like a failed state and anti-Western rhetoric. And we found that after the start of full-scale invasion, this list of these meta-narratives hasn't changed at all. So we still have absolutely the same list of main narratives of Russia in Ukraine and Russia in actually for Russian audience. And the language is still on the top of it.
And another interesting area. So we've talked about the influence of Russian propaganda, and even the penetration of Russian media products and cultural products into Ukraine, and why that is still a problem. And I've seen this myself with many refugees, primarily Russian-speaking refugees who are here in the UK, and you also have a generational difference as well, don't you? In that the younger people, up to the age and up to probably about sort of 40 or so, will have a far more nuanced and critical view of the media products, whereas the older generation will sometimes fall for these narratives designed to divide, and they will also have a memory of the Soviet Union. So for them, Ukraine is a new entity, and rather than something they were born with and born into, and perhaps have maybe it's easier to sort of divide them and confuse them in that sense. I mean, is it more complex than just a generational division?
I think it's a bit more complex. Just because, for example, just a few weeks ago, I read the results of some sociological survey among Ukrainians about the disinformation and about feeling of the main of the best feeling of the best future for Ukraine. And almost all, it's more than 80% of the respondents argued that they are happy that USSR stopped to exist. So it was absolutely like it was even I feel that it's too optimistic, just because the older person in Ukraine always tend to say that they're not happy that USSR stopped to exist. Just because it's about nostalgia, about that culture, about their young years, about their feeling of happiness when they were young. But for today in Ukraine, we have a great change of that nostalgic. There a lot of people stopped to feel happy and to think in optimistic way about our last, and that's why actually we still have the problem that older people, they tend to conduct a Russian culture, just because in their young years they had no, for example, Ukrainian culture at all. So, for example, at the start of the independence of Ukraine, it was absolutely difficult to find Ukrainian or Ukrainian language in popular culture. And that's why older people are still tend to go to Russian culture just because it's like a normal for them. For younger person, it's much more easier to conduct go and to find a good Ukrainian bloggers, for example, than for older people. But anyway, we have this our society are in the very in huge process of changing our ideas and our ideas and our beliefs in our future and in our and about our past. So I think that we can be quite optimistic with that.
And you shared a couple of interesting articles with me, and there's two that I'd like specifically to discuss, because I think we've covered a lot of the sort of disinformation ones in Ukraine and Russia itself. But interestingly, your organization also monitors, dare I say it, the bacteria of Russian culture growing in our media. You monitor those journalist organizations in Western countries who seem to consistently repeat or propagate Russian conspiracies and weaponized narratives.
Yeah, it was one of the greatest project of text during the last time. It was very popular. It was not so popular in Ukraine as it became popular in Europe, just because we tried to look at 19 countries of Europe and to find all the organizations and person who still support Russia. And when we just started this project, we understood how many of them are still very active. They are openly pro-Russian, and they have a lot of impact on different European countries. So we started our project and we choose a quite emotional name for them. It's like the germs of Russian world, or in Ukraine, it's about bacteria of Ruski Mir. So just try to underline that it is a really big problem of Russian impact, even in countries which are think that they are absolutely pro-Ukraine and they are partners of Ukraine. But anyway, they still have a big communities of people who can lobby Russian interests in Europe. And we even met with some members of European Parliament and shared also with them our main results and shared all this list. And for example, just a week ago, we updated this project, and we, for example, in the first version of this project, it's more created as a data journalism with a very I think it's quite cool visualization of different people and organizations that are visualized in form of bacteria. So it's quite emotional. But just a week ago, we updated this project and created an interactive table where you can choose your country, you can choose the area of interest, the type of organization. For example, it's about politics, it's about church, it's about media, education and culture, or another, and to look at the list of persons there and to read why actually we decide to add this person to the database, who is it, and what did he or she did in Europe, in that countries, and how it connected to Russia and another Russian, for example, propaganda, Russian media.
Absolutely. And there's a couple of other articles there. I mean, I think that's an incredibly important process there, because there are still many in the media, there are Western academics who will repeat narratives, but they'll also wrap it up in very, say, geopolitical terms, which means they still get widely debated. Mearsheimer, obviously one. Chomsky. These people are not necessarily paid Russian assets, but you don't have to be paid in order to reproduce that messaging. But there's some interesting stuff you've done. I mean, there's two other articles I think are absolutely fascinating, which are on your site, and we'll put links in the video to them. One is how Russia tried to create a Telegram media monster in order to undermine Ukrainian support for the war and for resistance. So I'd love to dig into that one. And then, of course, there is the epic article, the 12 months of war, with some extraordinary data visualizations. Well, we'll come to that one next, but let's tackle the Telegram channel one, because this cuts both ways, doesn't it? Russia has tried to create a sort of media weapon in Ukraine, which hasn't really worked through Telegram, but it has created a new ecosystem in Russia itself, which is the mil bloggers, the military bloggers, and Z patriots. And I'd be interested in your point of view of how those two campaigns differ, the one targeted Ukraine and the creation of the mil blogger environment in Russia.
Telegram became like a main instrument of Russian propaganda in Russia and unfortunately in Ukraine. I actually was the person who investigated the new network of Russian so-called occupational Telegram channels. It's almost 120 different Telegram channels created at the start of full-scale invasion and dedicated to different cities of Ukraine. We even mapped those Telegram channels and tried to understand what was the level of interest for Ukrainian different oblasts of Russian militaries. So they actually created the dozens of channels and tried to create like alternative media for those cities and to show that Russian occupation is absolutely normal, that we are still waiting for Russian militaries with flowers and so on. Yes, so they were absolutely not effective, fortunately. Yeah. Just because this network was created like for Russian monies after the start of invasion, and this network was absolutely pro-Russian. So they even at the logo of this channel, they showed the Russian flag, for example. So you can be absolutely sure that this is a Russian Telegram channel. It's not about the neutrality, so-called. So they were absolutely not effective, but actually in Ukraine, Russia do a lot in Telegram. It's not, this network is just one example of not effective campaign, but they have more effective campaigns about almost Ukrainian Telegram channels that were created much earlier than this full-scale invasion. They were created in 2019, as I remember. It's the network of Telegram channels, resident or legitimate, very famous Telegram channels where you can read Ukrainian content from Russian point of view. So they are still very active in Telegram, and that's why it's and we know that it's really difficult to do anything with Telegram. You can't ban. They have no policies of moderation. You can do anything with Russian propagandists who in Telegram write that you have to kill all the Ukrainians and you have no chances to ban this channel, even just for Ukraine, for example. That's why Telegram became a big problem for Ukrainian government and Ukrainian community of fact checkers. Like Telegram is the main source of fakes, of Russian fakes. But the only optimistic thing about the Telegram that it is quite easy to download all the data from Telegram and analyze it and investigate it. That's why we know that after the start of full-scale invasion, Russia created thousands of new channels with that symbols of Z, O, or V. And they created thousands of channels for Ukraine and even more channels for Russians. Just because Telegram became a channel, became the source of this feeling of opposition. So this feeling of opposition, like people who don't trust Putin, who don't like Putin, they read absolutely propagandistic Telegram and still sure that they are like on the they're opposite to Putin or opposite to official propaganda. And that's why for today we see the thousands. So we are, and together with new models like ChatGPT or another language models who can create content. And we know that the Sberbank already published the news that they are also creating some Russian language content generator. And we understand that in the nearest future, we will have even more. Just because for today they have a great corpus of propagandistic texts, and it's really easy to train a new model who will create something like this on based on the quite old narratives on Russophobic, on anti-Western rhetoric, anti-American rhetoric, anti-NATO rhetoric, and so on. They have dozens of texts already written by someone, and they can create model who will do even more.
And this is, I think, what people don't understand about these large language models. It's not that you create the primary text from the model, you create a framework or a set of narratives, and then you ask the AI to reproduce it in the tone of a particular individual. You almost create a little avatar, and then you can channel those narratives through multiple avatars and create this choir of fake voices and information. And that leads me to a question about the methodology that texty.org.ua adopts. So originally, a few years ago, when really the whole scene of countering disinformation began, fact-checking was, and to some extent still is, a key focus of many efforts to counter disinformation. But it doesn't work particularly well, does it? It's high intensity, high effort. And it reminds me a little bit of that saying, if you, you catch fish for somebody, it's a job you have to do forever. But if you teach them how to fish, that is far more effective. And it seems to me what you're doing is just that. You are pointing out the narratives, yes, but you're helping to educate journalists and the public in how to recognize narratives, how to question and compare primary sources to discover a sort of bias. So do you think this is a much more scalable and effective way of countering disinformation?
Of course, the most effective way to counter disinformation is media literacy. And if we will have the methodology of the spreading media literacy among big audience in a short term, it will be the best way. But it's almost impossible, unfortunately. Yeah, we need years for example, to add media literacy into schools, and to teach media literacy to teachers, school teachers, university lecturers, for example, to add the media literacy to schedules. Unfortunately, we need years for that. That's why we are not that organization who do a lot in actually media literacy educational things, but we do a lot in education of journalists. And for example, just today we have a school of data journalism for lecturers of different Ukrainian universities. It's like the journalist faculties, and we give them lectures on data journalism. And among in this program, we have 1 hour for the topic of disinformation and how you can investigate disinformation. If when we are talking about countering disinformation, it's not only about the fact checking. Fact checking is really cool, but you are absolutely right that fact checker projects, they always have lower audience than fakes. It's really difficult to engage even more audience that emotional fake already engaged. That's why I know that Ukrainian fact checkers, they're amazing. I really love this fact checking community, and the first day even I'm sure that we have a big community, fact checking community in Ukraine, just because we have thousands of fakes. But what we are actually doing, we show that we can investigate disinformation and propaganda with in more quantitative way. Together with algorithms, you can not only create disinformation, but you also can investigate it. For example, for our weekly monitoring, we look for at least 30,000 of news every week. It's 30,000 of texts, and we know that no one can read them all. Yeah, it's a very harmful and stressful activity to read so many Russian news. Yeah, but together with some algorithms, for example, with some topic modeling algorithms, you can split them into clusters, into little small topics, and the main topic. You can find the most popular topic and so on. So what we in Texas do, we are actually try to educate others how you can analyze Russian text, how you can look for disinformation, how you can look for main terms, for example, denazification or Nazis, neo-Nazism, Bandera, and so on, yeah, and how you can use even like a more complex methodology to find some emotions or to find some meta-narratives. So it's like the area where we are working on, and it's area in which we're really try to engage more and more journalists and data journalists, like in Ukraine and in other countries also.
And you'll also take this information, don't you? And you try to visualize it as well. So you don't just provide sort of the text information back again. You create extraordinary visualizations. And I'll share a link in the video, because the one that really caught my eye is the summary of 12 months of war. And, I'd love to do a separate episode just on the article, because it's incredibly rich. And it really does show the progress of the war, and at the same time, it helps to undermine all sorts of narratives, not least the one about Russia being a strong and effective military power. I mean, it shows how ineffective, in fact, they've been through the war. These visualizations are extraordinary. How do you get these out to journalists, and how do journalists tend to use them? Do they place them directly, or do they adapt them? Do they use their own, designers and their own sort of spin to adapt them for the publications? How do you get your informational product, as it were, to market?
Texas, actually, we are a quite small team. We have less than 20 person in editorial office, and almost all of us are like a full stack data journalists. So almost all of us can scrape data, clean it, analyze it, and at the end visualize. This project you are talking about, it's like our collective project. We worked on it at least 1 month. So we try to find all the main all the main focuses, what we can really tell about this 1 year. It was very it was about our emotions, our how our life changed really. And what we started from, we tried to find the list of the main topics where we can find some data, and the result, this project, it was we visualize it together with our arts director Nadia Kelm. She created this a very beautiful style of this database. And as I know, we publish this project in Ukrainian and in English. But as I know, the English version became even a little bit more popular, just because the main thing about great database and great, beautiful data journalist project is the possibility to have some more attention of different audience who even are not interested, for example, in Ukrainian war or in topic of this Russian-Ukraine war. But you can add it to Twitter and to find even more audience just together with the style, with this beautiful database. That's why I think it's one of the strong parts of data journalism that have a good database part. So we tried to get even more attention, just because we understand that at the start of full-scale invasion, we saw a big attention to this topic in media among of the world. Yeah, we saw a lot of attention of the biggest media, of worldwide media like New York Times, BBC, and so on. But we understood that after 1 year, it became lower and lower and lower. And it was our try to gain more attention to this topic, that we still live in war. We still have Russian troops on Ukrainian different areas in Ukraine, on the south of Ukraine. We still have occupied territories, occupied cities. We still have absolutely ruined cities on the eastern part of Ukraine. So we tried to gain more attention together with these projects.
And you mentioned earlier, or you inferred sort of financial issues, especially with some of the media organizations that previously would have taken Russian narratives for money, stories for money. But all media kind of struggles with finance, especially in war and with the reduction of advertising. How do you, as an organization, prevent the financial support you need and the revenue need from the informational products you're creating? How do you prevent those finances from distorting your editorial focus?
We are very thankful to donors. We are that media, we don't have advertising at all on our media. So we live, first of all, together. We are thankful to our donors. For example, one of the main donors of our disinformation project is National Democratic Institutes, and we cooperate with them a lot. And we, thanks to them, this project is still alive. Yeah, and we work with different donors. We don't work with just one. And for example, we work with NED or another. And we and in most of our project, you can find that picture that this project was published thanks to some organizations that actually gives us the possibility to work on it's actually the main problem of data journalism. I think it's not only about Ukraine, it's about all the countries. The data journalism, it's really slow journalism with quite a small small level of results. For example, one data journalist can give you like one big data project at months. So it's really difficult to find monies to have the data journalism group or office, for example. But we actually have some corporate monies. For example, we can create some dashboards to other organizations or create some data projects for others. But of course, most of the main impactful projects were created together with donors.
And you don't, just to clarify as well, you don't receive funding from the Ukrainian state, do you? You're not a government-funded organization.
No, from Ukrainian state, no. We just receive funding from, for example, when Ukrainian state or some Ukrainian state organizations receive funding, and we can cooperate with them on some projects, for example. And one more thing I didn't talk about, I think it's very important to understand that from the start of full-scale invasion, we started to cooperate a lot with state Ukrainian government through the Center of Strategic Communication. It's in the Ministry of Culture, was created in 2021. And this center is like the link between civil society organization and between government, Ukrainian government. And for example, we do a project on Russian disinformation, and from time to time we prepare some recommendations, for example, what Ukrainian government can do with it and how we can strengthen our information area, for example, or which counter narrative can be effective for today. And we cooperate with government organization, actually, with the Center of Strategic Communication. But it's more about cooperation, it's not about funding.
Well, my last question really centers on the future. Now, many who watch this channel will believe strongly in a Ukrainian victory, whether that means fully expelling Russia from the territory, from the legal territory of Ukraine, or at least being able to create some kind of, stable peace and end the war in a more dominant position. However, it's very unlikely that Russia will suddenly cease to be a threat. It's unlikely that the informational assault that we've seen going on, at least since 2014, and actually some people suggest much earlier than that, and many of the attitudes that underpin Putin's war obviously predate Putin and his administration. So this isn't going to go away. And of course, now you have, as you say, ChatGPT, you have AI, you have big data models that are going to make the ability to create effective fakes at scale far more easy. So how do you see the future of your technology or methodology and organization, not just in Ukraine, but throughout other societies that come under informational assault from a whole range of different sources?
Oh, it's a difficult question. Yeah, thank you. But I think that I can speak in two ways on this question. First of all, it's about the future of Ukrainians, of our society. I really believe that this future is more and more about understanding of disinformation, at least understanding of external disinformation, of Russian disinformation. It's really difficult when we have some internal conflict topics, but at least our society, even for today, have acquired high level of understanding of problem of or believing of existing of this disinformation. And our nearest future is about more and more actualizing of this problem. And in this way, it's more about this media literacy activities and or some politics of moderation of on different platforms. And I really believe that big tech platforms like Meta, like Google, or even maybe TikTok or Telegram, they will do more in the area in this topic of moderation of content and fact checking and so on. For example, Meta is for today is doing some not in ideal way, but do a lot in this like area of moderation and fact checking. And it's about like more society on the high level of understanding what our future will be about. And what about actually the tech state, the second topic? I think that in the nearest future, we will go from investigating only Telegram and Russian official news feed from RSS or from their site. And we plan to go and to look more and to investigate more Russian disinformation on other platforms like YouTube and TikTok. It's like a little spoiler about our future activities. We will have, I hope that this summer we will conduct some quite big projects on recommendation algorithms and TikTok Russian entertainment. So I think that what we have to understand is that Russian propaganda, it's not about Russian official propaganda on their TV or their media sites like RIA Novosti or TASS or RT or Sputnik. I think that the main thing that we should understand, and where other data journalists have worked a lot, is that idea of that it's not only one problem of official Russian propaganda, but we have another problems that are still not popular. For example, in Europe is understanding of colonization, of imperialism, of that idea that Russians are better than other countries and other societies of the that were in past in USSR, for example. So I think that the main idea where we have to do a lot is to show that it's not only the Russian propaganda is a problem, but it's also the problem that we have a high level of Russian imperialism and Russian like colonialism for their neighbors. So I think that in nearest future, we will fight against all that algorithms and some, even for today, we have a lot of bots who write in Ukrainian, but with some problems of automatic translation. And it's sometimes it's really funny to see how automated translation translated another word in another form. So now for today, it's quite easy to find these bots, but in the near future, but it will be much more difficult. And that's why we have to understand more like on the meta level of the high level, the main narratives, where you don't have to believe all these comments and all these bots if they are writing about them.
And humor helps, doesn't it? And one of the defining features of this war, I think, has been the use of humor by Ukrainians, and it's more of an organic kind of phenomenon And we've all seen the sort of video memes, we've seen the images, Ruski Karabil and all that kind of stuff, right from the start with the sort of Snake Island. And then you have phenomena like NAFO. And I think there's an interesting conjunction, isn't it? If you can get people to think critically through humor and then transition them to think critically about serious text-based media, it's a strategy, I think, which will develop further as time goes on.
It's actually always, you have to remember that any kinds of emotions they can impact you, so you can be more. It's more easy to manipulate people who are on their emotions, even if they are positive. That's why humor is quite strong thing. We even had a data project on the most popular memes of Russian-Ukraine war. And we found that Ukrainians did a lot and did absolutely great job about like joking on war topics. So it's like our way to survive. But anyway, we have to remember that any kind of emotions makes us more ready to manipulate it by someone.
That's an incredible insight there, and I think that's one which hopefully people will pick up on, and we can explore further in other episodes. Well, we're out of time, and there's still so many things I think we could dig into, and maybe we'll get the opportunity to do that again. But for today, I wanted to give you a huge thank you to appearing on the channel and sharing your insights, and of course, wish you luck in the incredible and absolutely essential work that you and your team are doing.
Thank you a lot. And I just want to thank everyone who help or just who stay with Ukraine and Ukrainians for today. It's really impressive, and I just want to thank you.
Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.